I'm coming across a lot of big historical fires in my research, and really question the stories we are told about them, from Nero fiddling while Rome burned, to Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocking over a lantern and starting the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. My name is Michelle Gibson. I am seeing the role of great fires in our historical narrative more and more as a smokescreen, which is defined as 1. A cloud of smoke created to conceal military operations, and 2. A ruse designed to disguise someone's real intentions or activities. Did all of these fires really take place? Did some fires actually take place and others not? Did fires get started intentionally for the purposes of the destruction of the architecture of the original Moorish civilization and the physical infrastructure of the planetary grid? The San Francisco fire of 1906 was said to have been caused by an earthquake. Was it? Looking at the list, I have picked just a handful of early fires in history to look into, as there are well over 200 recorded fires of cities and towns throughout history to choose from. I decided to start with the destruction of Carthage. In 146 BC, the ancient and powerful city of Carthage was systematically burned down over 17 days by the Romans at the end of the Third Punic War between Carthage and Rome, after which time it was said to have been redeveloped as Roman Carthage. Carthage was the capital city of the ancient Carthaginian civilization on the eastern side of Lake Tunis, located in what is now Tunisia. Carthage was a state of Phoenicia, which was a maritime and Mediterranean civilization said to have originated in what is now Lebanon. The ruins of ancient Carthage are located in the northern suburbs of Tunis, the capital of Tunisia. The most famous general of Carthage was Hannibal Barca, widely considered one of the greatest military commanders in history. He was perhaps best known for leading an invasion into Italy across the Alps in the Second Punic War, and with taking elephants along with him. This coin is said to bear his image. And yet this is the typical portrayal of him. Carthage was famed for its double harbor, known as a kothon, which was divided into a rectangular merchant harbor, followed by an inner protected harbor reserved for military use. You find the same type of architectural proportion, symmetry, and alignment in the perfect framing of the temple by the archway in ancient Carthage on the top, that is seen in the perfect framing of the Nelson Monument in the middle of the colonnade of the National Monument of Scotland in Edinburgh on the bottom. The architectural design pattern seen with the archways of the Bardo Museum in Tunis on the top is similar to that of these archways at the Fisherman's Bastion in Budapest, Hungary, on the bottom. This giant foot measuring 6 feet, or 1.8 meters, is on display at the Bardo Museum, believed to have been part of a colossal statue estimated to have been at least 50 feet or 15 meters high. Makes me wonder to what that foot was originally attached, with details of the foot right down to the realistic-looking toenails, joints, and the leather sandal. One last comparison for similarity before leaving this part of the world. On the top is a view of a street in the town of Sidi Bou Said, located 12 miles or 20 kilometers from Tunis in North Africa. On the bottom is a view of a street in Cusco, Peru, located on the western side of South America at an altitude of 11,152 feet or 3,399 meters. All coincidences? Or all built by the same civilization using the same templates? The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD was the one with the legend that the Emperor Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned. It was said to have started at the Circus Maximus in July of 64 AD. Altogether, it was said to have burned for 9 days, destroying 2/3 of Rome. Let's take a look at the importance of this place to ancient Rome. The Circus Maximus was said to be Rome's largest stadium. It was said to have an obelisk placed in it around 10 BC from Heliopolis in Egypt, and then a second obelisk from the Temple of Amun at Karnak, installed somewhere around 400 AD. We are told the same obelisk from Heliopolis has been in the center of the Piazza del Popolo in Rome since 1589. And the obelisk from Karnak in the square next to the St. John Lateran Archbasilica since 1588. For comparison, from my research, I know that the obelisks referred to as Cleopatra's Needle, located in London, Paris, and New York, weigh well over 200 tons, or 10 metric tons. How were they transporting and lifting extremely heavy obelisks around like this at that time, according to the history we've been taught? The Circus Maximus was located in what is called the valley between Aventine and Palatine Hills, two of the 7 hills of Rome. The Circus Maximus is right next to the place in the Tiber River where Tiber Island is located. Tiber Island is the only island in Rome on the Tiber River. It is described as a boat-shaped island connected by bridges to both sides of the river since Antiquity. It definitely looks like an artificial island. And is the Tiber River actually a canal? The Circus Maximus is on one side of Palatine Hill, the centermost of the 7 hills of Rome, and one of the most ancient parts of the city. The Roman Forum is on the other side of Palatine Hill. Palatine Hill was said to become the location of imperial palaces since the time of the Emperor Augustus, who reigned from 27 BC until his death in 14 AD. This is what remains of the Stadium of Domitian on Palatine Hill on the top left, which reminds me of megalithic stone circles and rows seen at the Beemore stone circles in County Tyrone, Ireland on the top right, and the Wasu stone circles in Gambia near Senegal in Africa. There's much more of historical importance to Rome in the vicinity of the Circus Maximus, including the Colosseum. What we are told in the narrative is that the fire started near the Circus Maximus in the shops where flammable goods were stored, and the fire expanded through narrow, twisted streets and closely located apartment blocks. Looters and arsonists were reported to have acted to spread the fire or to prevent measures from being taken to put out the fire. Yet it certainly looks like this part of Rome around the Circus Maximus was a very special place held in high regard, and the home of its emperors. It does not fit the description of a residential neighborhood for the masses of its citizenry that is described in the narrative. In 532 AD, we are told that the Nika riots took place in Constantinople, now Istanbul in Turkey, starting as a conflict over chariot racing and ending up as a violent riot against the Emperor Justinian. As a result, we are told half of Constantinople was burned or destroyed, and tens of thousands of people were killed. The rioting started at the Hippodrome, shown in the lower left side of this diagram. The Hippodrome of Constantinople just happens to look like the Circus Maximus in Rome, including the presence of obelisks. Unlike Rome, however, 2 obelisks remain in the original location of the Hippodrome in Istanbul, which is now called the Sultanahmet Square. One is the obelisk of Theodosius I, said to be an ancient Egyptian obelisk of Thutmose III. It was said to have been transported from Egypt and re-erected in the Hippodrome somewhere around 390 AD. The other is called the Walled Obelisk, or Masonry Obelisk, said to have an unknown construction date, but reconstructed by the Emperor Constantine VII in the 10th century. Also, like the imperial palaces on Palatine Hill next to the Circus Maximus in Rome, the Great Palace of Constantinople was located next to the Hippodrome. It was also known as the Sacred Place. Only a few remnants of the Great Palace's foundations have survived into the present day. The Hagia Sophia, or Holy Wisdom, is in the same complex. It was said to have been built in 537 AD as a Greek Orthodox cathedral, and later became an Ottoman imperial mosque in the year 1453. It has been a museum since 1935. It has the largest masonry dome in the world. It is important to note that the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul is oriented to the sunrise on the winter solstice. I'm going to end this video with a close look at the 1684 Toompea fire in Tallinn, Estonia. There are interesting tidbits tucked within the information available about Toompea that aligns it in importance with the locations of the fires in Carthage, Rome, and Constantinople. At the same time, there are inconsistencies about the details of the fire that was said to have taken place here in 1684. Toompea, which means Cathedral Hill, is described as being on a limestone hill that is an oblong tableland in the center of Tallinn, in the oldest part of the city. This is Toompea Castle, where it appears to be sitting on top of a massive earthwork. Toompea Castle is said to be an ancient stronghold, in use since the 9th century. In the present day, it houses the government of Estonia, and is said to have always been the seat of power for Estonia. Check out those massive walls. The fire of 1684 was said to be the most devastating fire of its history, destroying most of the buildings. Yet this place looks to have sophisticated buildings of very solid and heavy masonry. Toompea appears to be a very important place in Estonia, and looks to be in pretty good shape to have had such a huge destructive fire. The Toomkirk, or St. Mary's Cathedral, in which one information source I found said it was the only building to survive the 1684 fire, and that it was established by the Danes in the 13th century. Yet I found nothing to indicate that buildings like the Toompea Castle had been destroyed in this same fire. The Toomkirk is said to be the oldest church in mainland Estonia. The Russian Orthodox Nevsky Cathedral is right next to Toompea Castle. It was said to have been built in Russian Revival style between 1894 and 1900. There is already a pattern developing in just the 4 examples of historical fires that took place at seats of power in their respective parts of the world, and which I selected to look at in a random fashion. I did not know this when I started to research. I only remember Carthage having been completely destroyed by Rome from history in school, and the legendary connection with the 64 AD Rome fire to Nero. I didn't know about the Constantinople riots, and had never even heard of Toompea before. All of these places piqued my interest when I started looking at where the fires were said to have taken place, so I decided to focus on them for this video. As a result of all my research thus far, I believe that 1851 was the official start date of the new historical narrative that was superimposed over the existing advanced infrastructure with the opening of the Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of all nations in London's Crystal Palace, kicking it off in 1851. In my next video, I will be focusing on fires that occurred around the mid-1800s.